Imagine a system so insidious, it systematically exploited the labor of freed individuals, turning freedom into chains again. This was not just a remnant of the past, this was convict leasing in the post-Civil War South. Join us on Black Business Files as we delve into this dark chapter in American history, exploring the origins, the brutality, and the lasting impact of a practice that perpetuated racial inequality and economic exploitation.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Black Business Files, where we uncover the forgotten stories of Black innovators, inventors, and business owners that helped shape history. If you like uncovering stories like this, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned to the end. I'll see you there. Let's get into it.
The roots of convict leasing originated in the aftermath of the Civil War, precisely during the era of Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877. With the economy of the South in tatters, former slave owners looked for a means of retaining cheap labor now that slavery had been abolished. The 13th Amendment, while outlawing slavery, allowed for involuntary servitude as punishment for crime, a gigantic loophole that paved the road for the exploitative practices that would follow. As black codes were passed, laws that aimed at controlling the newly freed black population emerged. These laws criminalized small offenses such as vagrancy, loitering, or not having proof of employment on one's person, and thus greatly increased incarcerations. The southern states turned quickly to leasing convicts to private enterprises, thus acquiring a captive workforce at virtually no cost. By the late 1860s, convict labor had become integral to the economy, as private companies eagerly contracted with states. This new system solved the desperate search for revenue by southern state governments, while effectively allowing industries to profiteer from the cheap labor of imprisoned African Americans. The transition from slavery to convict leasing demonstrated a continued exploitation of black labor. Among the first steps taken to assure white supremacy from the South in the post-Civil War period were the Black Codes. Established by the South due to the Reconstruction Act, these acts constrained the rights that were allowed to the new African American freemen, and indeed a source of labor was availed through it. What this really became was just another type of slave code system, enabling criminalization through black social, economic, and civil rights. Key features of the Black Codes included strict vagrancy laws, which declared that any unemployed black person could be arrested. These laws facilitated the arrest of countless individuals for not conforming to labor expectations, often leading to forced labor in private industries as part of convict leasing arrangements. The enforcement mechanisms were brutal, with law enforcement incentivized to round up as many black individuals as possible. These laws further implemented the policy of forced apprenticeship, whereby black children could be taken and compelled to work by white employers, many of whom were former enslavers. It extended a system of exploitation well after the supposed legal end of slavery and entangled white supremacy into the South's economic framework. The 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, banned slavery and involuntary servitude, but contained in its wording the infamous loophole that would become a source of grave consequences in allowing involuntary servitude for punishment of crime. The 13th Amendment states, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." The exemption thus became the legal cover for convict leasing and was manipulated by southern states to launch a new economic order resembling slavery without its inflammatory title. This was the legal bedrock upon which southern legislatures could establish a range of laws that criminalized mundane activities for black communities, and then funneled them into the system to lease them out for labor. The phrasing of the amendment would become one of oppression, not liberation, and opened the door to mass incarceration for African Americans. The consequences of exploiting this loophole were far-reaching. As the states realized the financial advantages gained by leasing convicts, they started to refine those laws which criminalized black behavior, and thus increased not only the rates of incarceration, but also state revenue from convict leasing. This would be one of those obvious instances where legal frameworks could subvert the very meaning of freedom. Convict leasing was a very lucrative business for state governments and private businesses. Poor, underfunded states greatly benefited by leasing their prisoners. Revenues from leasing contracts replenished the state coffers while at the same time cutting the expenses of operating penitentiary facilities. By the end of 1898, convict leasing contributed an astonishing 73% to Alabama's yearly state revenue. Private businesses also made enormous profits by utilizing convict labor. They paid the state nominal fees for the rights to lease convicts, much less than what they would pay for ordinary labor. This economic advantage came with horrific compromises in which the well-being of the prisoners was sacrificed for profit. Companies had every incentive to maximize productivity with minimal investment in worker care. These deals were so profitable that they provided states with a very lucrative motive for arresting more people in the name of law enforcement. The legal framework encouraged prisons to be revenue generation machines rather than places for the rehabilitation of convicts. This economic model fundamentally changed the way society viewed incarceration, comparing it to an industry built on profit. Convict labor was shifted to heavy and dangerous industries, which completely restructured the Southern economy. The three heavy industries were agriculture, mining, and railroad construction. Each industry required a labor force that was not only inexpensive, but also disposable. Inmates were subjected to abysmal conditions, with many experiencing hardships similar to those under slavery. In agricultural settings, convicts worked on big plantations, most of the time planting cotton and tobacco. Overseers implemented violent methods of enforcement to discipline the prisoners for efficiency in work performance. The culture of violence cultivated in these agricultural settings had lasting impacts, with many serving lifelong physical and psychological disabilities. Another sector that prospered using convict leasing was mining. The convicts were sent deep inside the coal mines, usually with the guards' surveillance armed. With the lack of any safety measures, the rates of injury and accidents at work became extremely high, contributing to mortality rates among the laborers who were imprisoned. Prisoners worked long hours underground, exposed to dangerous gases, collapsing tunnels, and extreme temperatures. Such hazardous conditions depict a grim picture of the realities the convicts had to face. Building railroads required convicts to perform heavy labor, such as laying tracks, clearing debris, and breaking rocks. Workers were often overworked to exhaustion under harsh weather conditions, with little rest or food. Convicts were also sent to remote locations to cut timber or extract turpentine, often in unsanitary camps where disease outbreaks were common. The living conditions of the convicts under the leasing system were very bad, characterized by neglect and abuse. The quarters were overcrowded, unsanitary, and had little concern for hygiene or safety. This led to the outbreak of diseases like tuberculosis and cholera, which was made worse by the minimal access to food and clean water. The prisoners were given very minimal rations of food, which in most cases comprised plain foods devoid of nutritional value. This inadequate diet led to malnutrition, which weakened the prisoner and made them more vulnerable to diseases and other injuries. Living in unsanitary conditions and being malnourished, convicts faced daily struggles that took a heavy toll on overall health. Medical attention for prisoners was almost nil. If a prisoner happened to be hurt or sick, the usual modus operandi followed was to deny all requests for care, so that the individual should continue working in worsening health. This deliberate denial made prisons death traps. Many were laid low and died in their sickness, oftentimes without recourse. Cruelty was a prime attribute of the convict leasing system, whereby overseers took harsh punishment to keep the worker in control. Common, brutal corporal punishment included frequently beaten and whipped for minor offenses, and such things became methods to be performed in relation to an assertion of authority. The act of violence created fear within the environment and reiterated subjugation among the black workers. The lessee firms had full authority over the convicts, for which the violence was whimsical because the guards sought to maximize the output. Minor infractions led to severest of punishments, flogging, and public displays of punishment. The culture of violence inculcated among the guards and overseers was not restricted to discipline alone. This reflected a general societal callousness toward black lives. Most convicts were treated like dispensable commodities, no more than tools for profit.
Hey, real quick before we continue, if you're enjoying this deep dive and you want to see more, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll be notified when we drop a new video. And after you hit that like button, hit that hype button. Help us push this information through the YouTube algorithm. All right, let's get back to it.
The mortality rates were extraordinary in the convict leasing system. Reports suggested that 1 out of every 10 leased convicts died, a death rate 10 times higher than in states that did not lease convicts. Overwork, coupled with poor living conditions, physical abuse, and lack of medical care, combined in a storm of premature death reflective of a system fit for exploitation, not rehabilitation. Alone in 1873, an astonishing 25% of all black leased convicts died during their imprisonment. That alone serves as a significant indicator of the conditions being lethal to which these persons were exposed. A lot of the victims succumbed to diseases that could have been prevented, but considering the horrific environment imposed on them, turned fatal. Historian Robert Perkinson estimated that upwards of 30,000 people across southern states died directly due to convict leasing between 1865 and 1940. The 2018 discovery of the Sugarland 95 was an important landmark in the painful history of convict leasing. Human remains from 95 Africans were uncovered during construction work for a new school in Sugarland, Texas. Archaeological examinations revealed that these persons died because of the convict leasing system working in this area during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Forensic analysis upon examination showed that many of them found had diseases and brutal treatment, which mostly led to early deaths. The Sugarland 95 not only serve as a reminder of this dark historical period, but also signal the systemic exploitation and violence that characterized the convict labor system across the U.S. South. These events were received by the community with great sadness and demands for remembrance. By the time DNA research projects began to identify possible descendants of the Sugarland 95, it emerged that those buried had various important stories to tell. Reconnections essential in reconnecting the present and the past. One of the most infamous cases regarding convict leasing is that of Martin Tabert, a young white man whose sad end exposed all the evils of this practice. In 1921, Tabert was arrested in Florida for vagrancy, one of those catch-all charges so often deployed to criminalize poverty. He was sentenced to serve under the convict lease system. His case epitomized how arbitrary and cruel the legal system was when it came to laws perpetrating exploitation. Despite his family's efforts to pay off his fines, Tabert was leased to the Putnam Lumber Company, where he was subjected to inhumane conditions. His refusal to yield to the overseer's violent means of discipline led to his death at the hands of a whipping boss, thus exposing the brutal treatment one faced in the convict leasing system. The media reports of his death stirred public outrage that created calls for reform, which eventually brought an end to convict leasing in many states. His story still haunts as a reminder of the number of human lives affected by systemic racism and labor exploitation during this dark chapter in American history. As public awareness of the abuses inherent in convict leasing grew, so did opposition to the system. By the early 20th century, widespread outrage over the treatment of convicts led to legislative reforms aimed at abolishing the practice. Activists, labor unions, and reformers mobilized to shed light on this inhumane system, calling for humane treatment of the incarcerated. While Alabama was the last state to formally end convict leasing in 1928, significant political opposition remained strong, since many local politicians benefited handsomely from it. However, public pressure became so intense, along with awareness of the brutality that the convicts had to bear, that it finally stopped leasing. Although convict leasing was abolished in name, the practice would survive under other guises, including chain gangs. The fact that these exploitative labor practices would persist for such a long period speaks volumes regarding deep-seated issues with the American approach to both incarceration and labor, an ongoing challenge that resonates in today's debate on prison reform.
Thanks for watching to the end. I hope you enjoyed. Leave us a comment down below. Let us know what you think. We would love to hear from you. And if you have any suggestions on any stories you'd like us to cover, let us know that as well. And as always, this is Black Business Files.